Hello, everyone. Hope everybody's okay today out there. Sorry for starting a few minutes late. I was having some technical difficulties. But welcome in. Welcome to the joy of game mastering. Hope everybody's having a good day out there. Hey, Warden. Hey, Claude. Hey, Adrian. Hey, Valken. Hello, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with me today. So, today's episode of the Joy of Game Mastering is all about keeping things fresh. It's a topic that was requested by one of our viewers. So I wanted to dive in and talk about that a little bit. Now, here on the Joy of Game Mastering, we just provide general game master advice for people looking to take the step into that realm of the hobby. Sort of demystifying, making it seem attainable for everybody, because I truly believe that everybody can be a game master if they if they try. It's not as hard as it looks, I promise. But our topic today is keeping things fresh. So what to do when you're in a situation where you've been running a game for a long time and you're starting to experience things like burnout or things like disinterest or having trouble coming up with new ideas, which can happen to anybody who does anything for too long. Hey, GM Jonesy, good to see you. So if you have questions about keeping things fresh, go ahead and start popping them into chat. We'll start talking about it. Hello, Squire. Good to see you. Glad everybody is here. Sorry I started a little bit late and I had some technical difficulties on my end. But yeah, one of the things that can happen to game masters as they continue on in this part of this role is you could find yourself in a situation where you've been running the same game for a long time. You're running the same campaign, you're interacting with the same player characters, and it just starts to get a little stale, either for you or for the players. You can sort of tell as they're going through the game that things aren't as exciting. The ideas aren't coming as easily. That can happen to anybody, and it's happened to me. The ways around it vary from person to person, but they often come down to communication. So saying to your players, I'm feeling this feeling, I want to get to the bottom of it. What are your guys' thoughts about how the game has been going? So I try to ask at the beginning or the end of every session, just a temperature check with the players. How are you finding what we're going through? Is there stuff that you'd like to see more of? Stuff you'd like to see less of? Especially when I get to the end of a story arc. Because I tend to think of my campaigns in short stories with an overarching story that goes over the top of it. Claude says communication in this economy? Yeah. But talking to your players and saying, hey, I'm feeling this way. Does anybody else, interrogating where that's coming from? Is it because that you've had too many similar stories in a row? Is it because you've been bogged down in some kind of story beat or some kind of decision? This year was particularly tough for me as a game master over on the Untold Stories project, because I felt like I made a mistake with our ongoing campaign. I think we spent too much time doing something that was a little bit outside the norm of what we were doing. I opted to take our players to Barovia in Mutants Masterminds rules engine to go and resolve some dangling plot threads from other campaigns I'd run in the past. Because I'd had some repeat players, and I felt bad that storyline hadn't been wrapped up. And something about that situation just sort of sucked a lot of the joy of the experience out for me as the game master. I don't know if it was probably a combination of the tone being very different from the game I typically ran for Freedom League Dark. The fact that I had run Curse of Strahd 4 or 5 times at that point, And it felt like I was doing this to resolve something external from the game that we were doing. And that fact made it very easy for me as the GM to put off and procrastinate my prep work, even to put off or to procrastinate sessions. So, oh, sorry, my camera is having a moment. Camera, come back. And Jonesy, no, this isn't your fault or anything like that. This is something that it was something I thought was a fun idea, and then when I hit the execution of it, I realized, oh no, I have 9 player characters between 6. I have 9 player characters between 6 players, and there's such a difference between Dungeons and Dragons and Mutants and Masterminds in terms of difficulty and character expectations that a lot of what makes Barovia work is difficult to replicate in Mutants and Masterminds because the heroes are so much more powerful. They're so much harder to frighten and to challenge. And that's just a key difference in the ethos of the campaign I'm running and the time we spent there. So it was easy to get a little burned out and what's funny is this Barovia thing was something I tried to do to keep things fresh. I wanted to try this. And I think it's important as a game master to be able to tell yourself and to tell your players, I messed up. I made this decision, and I think it is detrimental for my enjoyment of what we're doing. And I'm worried that that's also the case for some of you. And I didn't have that conversation. I sucked it up. I got through that experience, and just as we got back to Earth Prime to continue our regularly scheduled programming, I was getting really rejuvenated, re-energized to tell these stories again. And then now we're on our 3-month break. So I'm very excited to get back to it in the beginning of the year. But it was something I had to really, that really ate at me and really, it was hard to overcome. And I want you to know that even as somebody who does this all the time now for a living, it can happen to you. You know, burnout is tough, and you have to be able to tell people that you are experiencing that feeling. Nate asks, did power level have a hurdle to overcome? Yeah, I think the fact that Mutants and Masterminds characters are intentionally much more powerful than a typical Dungeons and Dragons party, it made Gothic horror something that was difficult to achieve from a setting perspective. And the fact that there were so many characters on screen at any time, and I had players playing multiple characters, and it was very difficult. It's very difficult to challenge an army of player characters. You know, frightening 4-player characters is very different than frightening 12 of them. And people having to play multiple characters, I understand where the frustration came from. And it was something I was observing as a game master, but I wasn't commenting on. And that's tough. It's very tough. Rain LeBeau says, been fighting burnout on my Fantasy Age campaign for years. Where do you think your burnout is stemming from? Is it related to sort of the routine that you found yourself in for preparing for the game, or are you just not interested in the storylines, or where's that coming from? And that's where I want to get into the topic of keeping things fresh. So it's easy to fall into a routine with your gameplay loop with, okay, this is the monster of the week, this is the villain of the week, this is, how would I have gone back and fixed it if I had the chance? I would have been much more intentional about how long I thought it was going to take, and I would have done a lot more prep work on my end to ensure that we were going to be there for like 4 or 5 sessions instead of 9 months. I also probably would have asked the players the players who had characters who were stuck in the cliffhanger, I would have asked them do you want to play both of your characters, or can we take this time for you guys to play your characters from the situation, and the people who are joining who do not have characters in the situation, those are our tiebacks to the other campaign. So we would have only had the 6 players instead of the 12 of them. And I would have spoken to my players up front. I would have been, hey, I thought this was going to be a really fun idea. This was a great cliffhanger to end our last little mid-season on, but this isn't feeling the way that I thought it was going to feel. And if that's the case for you guys, what can we do? What do you want to do? It's a conversation I should have had that I didn't have with my players. Rain LeBeau, we've taken breaks in the campaign, which did help, but I think I've also been noticing that I get real concerned about spending hours prepping an adventure scenario, and then my players do the one thing I forgot about, and my bespoke scenario suddenly will feel shoehorned to try and repurpose. Yeah, that can be really hard. And that's, having to deal with all these different people making all these different choices can be tough, especially when you spend all this time. We've got episodes about prep and how to make it future-proof or player-proof. I guess that's probably what I should call it, is player-proof. So that your prep work can be general enough that it can be something you could drop in, even if it's not shoehorned necessarily, it's just reskinned for what they're doing. And having that conversation with them, because players will have an expectation of, is this a sandbox campaign? Is this a story-driven campaign? And then telling them, there are things that I'm preparing from a story beat perspective that I would really love to see. What does that look like to you guys? What is engaging to you as players to want to get involved in a storyline instead of going off on your own path? And letting them know that even if you have this story beat in mind, you're still going to preserve their agency. The agency is more about their reactions to what's happening and building natural consequences off of that, but still having a direction to point to. Nate Robbins, I have a different issue when I was a GM for so long in a game that I've lost my ability to be a player and be objective of the way that other people run their games to my standards. I feel bad. That's tough. I run into that too. I've been a game master since I was 11, so I've been a game master for 22 years, and that was the first role I had, was game master. My dad bought my brother and I the 3rd edition starter set when it came out for Dungeons and Dragons, and he said, you can't play with me until you guys learn how to play. So we all opened up the book, we all went through everything, and we found out there was a role called Dungeon Master, and my siblings and my friends all forced me to do it, and I've been here ever since. I wouldn't change it for the world, but it does lead to times where I'm sitting at the table and I'm thinking, I don't know if I would have reacted that way, or I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that's the decision I would make, but I'm curious to see how you're going to pull this out. Paul says, one thing we used to do would be rotate GMs. Everyone would create new characters in the same world, and someone would run a story arc. The regular GM would get a chance to play for a change, and he'd recharge his batteries. That's a great technique for fighting burnout and keeping things fresh and sharing the load. A lot of game masters can find themselves doing a lot of the work for everybody to have a good time. I'm a huge proponent of outsourcing some of that work to players. Things like treasure keeping, things like map keeping, note taking, recaps, and even some story beats where I'll sit back and I'll let them talk out what's going on, and I'll note what they think is happening. And if it's a good idea, I'll just take that idea and that'll be the truth. And I'll be the person who came up with the idea all along, and they're smart enough to catch the hints. Or saying that if they say, hey, do I have a contact in this location? Asking them, yes, you do. What's their deal? What's their name? What's their, what do they look like? What's their story? How do you know them? It's a rule I read recently called I Know a Guy, which is a really good rule. It's sort of taking inspiration from in Empire Strikes Back when Han Solo was like, I know this Lando guy. And I think if that was a game, that would be Han's player telling the GM who Lando is, what the relationship is. Rain says, definitely dig my own grave by giving my players toys to play with that represent their importance in the campaign, so plenty of that problem is my fault. And my hardest lessons is when I say no. Yeah, I think a lot of my hardships are things that I build for myself, giving my players toys, running high-level games, building my own setting while we adventure. Yeah, that's tough. And saying no is one of the hardest things as a game master. I am a huge proponent of yes and or no but, where if, within the realm of possibility, I'm happy to accept a scenario posited by a player with the wrinkle that I will say, yes, that is true, and this is also true. If I do say no, it is a no, but this instead. So, no, you can't do that, but here's something similar that is still in the same vein that you want to accomplish that is within the realm of possibility, in my opinion. And being willing to accept that this is a group project and they are going to have story beats that they want to include. And letting that go, letting that happen, that's one of the best things that you can do. DM Tales, I love winding up players with something and then watch them come up with the next beat. Yes, one thing I like to do to keep things fresh is to not know as much about what's going to happen. I do a lot of my prep work in creating an interesting scenario. So what the conflict is, who the villain is, what their motivation is, and coming up with a really engaging opening scene, and then sort of just turning them loose. Because if you don't know what's going to happen, it's much more exciting, and it's easier to be excited about, where you know what the villain wants. I also tell new game masters to always write down what the villain wants, what they want to pay for that thing, and what they're willing to sacrifice for it. If you have those three things, you can often come up with realistic reactions from the antagonist in your story. Whether that is a big villain, whether that's an organization, those three pieces of information you can use to improvise a lot of reactions and to let the heroes in on, this is what the villain is all about. Nate, you plagiarist, the player's intellectual properties are never protected from the GM. Yeah. Just like no plan survives first contact with the players, no ideas off the table for the game master to take from them. And my players at this point know that I'm very willing to listen to what they say and take that in as an answer to a problem. And it's about trust. It's about when you're first starting off and you're first gathering a group of players, it can be hard to know what is exciting to them and what they are, what they will accept from you, because some players have had bad experiences with game masters. And some game masters have had bad experiences with players. And it's communicating and showing that there is a trust there and that you are on their side. You want the conflict that they go into to be difficult and engaging. But at the end of the day, you're a huge fan of the players. You want them to have the cool moments. You want them to succeed. Because we're all telling the story together. And theoretically, we're all playing these games with our friends. Or people who are paying us, or people who are at a convention and you just want to show off your favorite game. There are people who have these antagonistic relationships with past GMs that is a style of game that people enjoy. It's not for me. And I think that for most game masters, you'll have a better time if you approach the game as the player's number one fan. Not a player's number one fan, but the whole group's number one fan. Logicore says, I'm a big fan of you can try, but then setting an exorbitant difficulty or a huge consequence for attempting it. Yeah, on that same note, Logic, one of my I'm a huge advocate for never make anybody roll anything unless failure and success are interesting. Because theoretically, you want your characters to be competent. You want them to be the protagonist we can root for in a story. And if they're not competent, like baseline competent, then it's hard to rally around them. Poll. I love it when players come up with something fun and creative that I haven't thought of, but it takes a lot to get your brain to the point where you can do that. Yes, it takes a lot of practice. And that's the hardest part about being a game master, is getting repetitions in. Approaching players, seeing how they react to situations, and knowing for asking my players for their feelings about the game and how I'm prepping it, or at least have been reminded and need to re-internalize it. Yeah, it's true. Asking people for feedback is not a sign of being a bad GM, and it's not a sign of a lack of confidence. We are creating a situation that is tailored. Yeah, we're creating a situation that is tailored to the taste of the people who are playing with us, and taking that feedback is not a reflection on your quality as a game master. It is. There are 4 to 12 people involved in this, and I want to make sure that everybody feels heard, because I'm one person trying to entertain a lot of people and trying to be entertained by a lot of people. A lot of game masters don't remember that their enjoyment of the game is also a factor in what we're doing. So many of us get caught up in, are my players having a good time? Am I doing enough prep work? Am I doing enough? Am I doing this thing? And we don't give ourselves the credit of, this is a game for us too. We're meant to be having fun. Squire says, how far do you like to plan things out? Currently, I'm 2.5 adventures prepped and ready, but I fear that things won't flow as smoothly as I hope and won't make sense from one to the next after playing. I tend to, and my prep work is different than a lot of other people's, but I tend to prep, again, the villain's motivation and goals for the overarching story that I'm telling, whether that is for one adventure or 24 adventures. I tend to plan the overarching story out to a whole season of the game we're playing. From there, I tend to only do prep work for the adventure directly in front of me. So I'll prep the scenes, I'll come up with a couple of bits of flavor text. If there is a character who needs a big stat block, I'll write the stat block up, and I'll come up with little connecting tissues from scene to scene, and maybe some loose hanging plot threads at the end of the session. And then once the session is over, I'll break down and I'll take a detailed set of notes about what happened, and then I'll start planning out the next scene, next adventure from that, the next session from that. And at the end of the session, I'll ask my players, hey, what did you notice? What do you think is relevant to what we're doing? And I'll incorporate some of their recap/feedback into the prep I'm doing for the next one. 2.5 adventures prepped is not bad, especially if that's how you feel confident in presenting a session. But I wouldn't do more than like 3 or 4 ahead, because then you start to get into the situation where things have to happen for the story to go on, or you have to redo a lot of the prep work you did to accommodate when things don't necessarily go the way that you plan. Rain says, I asked the player how they felt about the structure of the adventure coming up soon, and they had some suggestions that I used and made the game much smoother. Communication really makes it work. Yeah, 100%. Plans are good, but are meant to be broken. Yep. You don't have to roll to run up the stairs unless failing gets you caught. Yes. Claude, oftentimes one of the best way to keep my excitement for a game up involves just chatting about games with other GMs. Yeah, finding other game masters that you can chat with and tell the secrets to helps a lot. I have this thing where I have such a hard time. Like, if I buy a Christmas present for somebody, I want to just give it to them immediately, because I hate holding on to these exciting ideas as they come to my head. So having a dedicated person that you can talk to who's outside of the game situation, whether it's another game master online here at the Atomic Think Tank, or just a friend who's not part of the campaign because they can't be because of scheduling or they live far away or something like that. Somebody that you can dish to really helps keep things fresh and keep things exciting for you, and gives you a chance to spitball ideas with somebody who's an impartial outsider. Paul, it's really easy to get hung up on our own flaws, and 9 times out of 10 the players won't even be aware that they exist. That's true. One thing I like to tell everybody is that the players don't have access to the script. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know how you're feeling about what's happening as long as you don't present that information to them. It's important. It's important to remember not to apologize before a performance, because that will color how people perceive what's happening. And this is acting advice that I've received, is don't apologize before a performance, but I think it's very relevant to game mastering. Because in some ways it is a performance. You're sort of the Wizard of Oz pulling the strings behind the curtain. And what they don't know is that this is a Rube Goldberg machine that will explode if you look at it in even the slightest way wrong. And just being confident, projecting that energy, and just not panicking is a great way to let your players feel confident that you know what's going on. Even if you don't know. If you can fake it, you can make it. Sort of that general advice. Claude says, thank your players for their feedback. I communicated that I really appreciate it when a player said they loved the game. I told them I really needed to hear that. And he was like, good to know. Yeah, if that's an important part of you knowing that you're doing a good job, tell your players, can you just tell me if you're having fun? Can you tell me, what you're liking about what we're doing? Because it helps me know that I'm doing a good job. It's nearly December 1st, which is when I think you're legally allowed to ask, do you want your present now? Yes, I agree. Oh man, I love being the GM's friend who's not playing. Yes, I'm bad at not panicking. Yeah, and Rain, that's hard. Your face is not on mute. You have to remember that if somebody said something insane to you, you have to just no-sell it as best you can. And I think there's a lot of great tools like taking a 15-minute break after something completely blindsiding happens. Saying, and with that cliffhanger, let's take a 10-minute break to refill our drinks and go to the bathroom or something. And I'm going to go panic for a second just by myself and write a couple notes real quick about what's going to happen. Claude says, that advice helped me so much at Origins. Didn't tell anyone I was con jamming for the first time, and that helped get the first game in the rearview mirror more smoothly. Yeah, and you get better by doing more often than anything. And worrying about doing it perfectly the first time is going to get you into more trouble than it's not. I tell this to people all the time. It is much easier to edit something which exists than it is to conjure perfection from nothing. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have games happen where you say, oh, that didn't really go the way I wanted it to, or this wasn't exactly what I hoped it would be. And that's okay. You're learning. You're riding the bike. You have to get back on. Warren, of course you can ask an Origins question. Paul says, hate to blow my own horn, but as a GM with anxiety, I recently did an article on GMing with anxiety for the Atomic Think Tank. I'm sure that's a great article. Yeah, there's so many great articles on there. Trying to beat that need for perfection with some projects I should do. I'm doing it too. Even at the level of game mastering that I do professionally, it is a constant battle. It is easy to get sucked up into your feelings. It's easy to worry about that. When should we expect to know if our events got approved? That's a good question. Origins just moved over to a new system. So I know that there are times that they approve things fairly quickly, and I know that there are times that they don't approve everything until like the week before event registration. So, yeah. Did you already submit events, Warden, or did you? I was gonna ask if you wanted to submit events with us at the Untold Stories Project with our big GM block. Yeah, I do want to circle back. Paul mentioned being the friend of the GM who's not playing is great. Yeah, it is. And finding game masters that you can chat with. Oh, good, Warden. Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, they're approved on my end, but I'm waiting for Origins to hear back. But finding friends who are game masters that you can commiserate with that's another way, both to keep yourself on track and to keep things fresh, because you can ask, hey, how would you handle this kind of plot line? Or, I've run into this, I've sort of written myself into this corner. What's the best way out of it? Things like that. Logicore says, yeah, I tend to set up games as by end of session, I want the players to be here. Then I'll pick out 3 bullet points to happen, like this encounter, they meet this NPC, or they overhear this conversation, and fit those in where appropriate while letting the players do what they want in between. It works well for me. Yeah. Having a balance between being prepared and fully improvising that's my favorite way of GMing. But yeah, I've had. You guys saw this weekend, I ran a game with 0 prep at all. So it is possible. And it's knowing that you're not doing it alone. You're not the only person responsible for the joy of the rest of the game. And having good players is a great start for being a good game master. Even sharing other players' arcs with trusted players just to be able to say it is nice. Yeah, if you have players who can be cool about meta information, you can talk to them about it too. If it's relevant to their character, I love the reaction that people get when something happens organically. But there will be times when you need to tell your players, this needs to happen this way. This is particularly true for things like flashback episodes where, you want to give them this exposition, but that story beat needs to end a certain way. So telling your players that as they come on board, that's a good trick. Especially if it's like a Halo Reach situation where everybody will be dead at the end of the story. Because if you tell them that they're going to die, but you don't tell them that you need them to die, the players will do everything in their power to make it not happen. Or another popular, this happened to me with Freedom League Dark, during the Nether War campaign. At the end of it, I fully intended for one of the players to have to sacrifice their hero to resolve the Nether War situation. And one of the other players came to me and said, hey, I like this idea. My character's not from this dimension. She came from a dimension where Una won the war. I think it would be cool if she was the one who laid down her life to resolve the situation amicably for everybody. And I didn't communicate that beforehand with the players, other than the player who suggested the idea. And when she tried to sacrifice herself, all of them did everything they could to make it not happen. But it was a great opportunity, because the way I resolved that was, in this strange metaphysical magical instance, each of you is asked to provide a name to sacrifice to make the ritual go off. And all of them picked themselves. So I took that story beat, and the way I resolved it was one of them elsewhere in the multiverse was killed. And that's what led to our Freedom League Dark in the Multiverse of the Master Mage as the follow-up season. Because the death of their altars in a bunch of different universes caused a ripple effect that has caused this next conflict in the story. So I took the player's desire to throw a wrench into my plan, and I made that the plan. And you have to be willing to be sort of flexible on things like that. Claude says, that's how my campaign stuff works. I pick a thing to happen, then I do a bullet point for each character for a personal plot point to move. Sometimes I get to them, other times I don't. Yeah. And when you're, it's important, especially in regards to keeping things fresh, to know what space you're working with. Is this a one-shot? Is this intended to be like a 2-adventure mini-series or an 8-adventure mini-series? Or is this our ongoing campaign that we're going to play for the next year to, however long? And knowing how much space, how much runway you have to work with gives you a chance to sort of let things go if they're not naturally happening. You can just say, okay, I'll just put that off until a more organic moment comes up for it. If you don't have those moments, then perhaps you need to look at your bullet points and say, is this really something that can happen in one adventure? Or is this really an adventure beat that will be, it'll feel fulfilling if it happens in a one adventure scenario? Nate says, I find it very refreshing to have players that can develop their characters on the fly and have an idea of where they want to go with their story, because it helps you fill in your blanks as GM. Yeah. And again, great players is one of the best things that you can have as a game master, to be a good game master. Especially if you have players who are also game masters, because they know. They know what the struggle is like, and they're willing to pitch in. Claude says, damn, that was a great way to roll with your players' punches, Alex. I don't like to pat myself on the back a whole lot, but I did feel pretty good about it. That worked out. Dominic, good to see you. It's been ages since I've been able to catch one of these. Well, I'm glad you're here now. We're talking about keeping things fresh. We're talking about giving yourself grace as a game master. This is a big in your feels episode, I think. Rain says, had to do that in my last session. A player was adamant about chasing an artifact that the villains were supposed to secret away, and they recovered it. I'll have to write for that now. But it turned into an exciting scene where one hero ran after the artifact and the others fought the boss with the one hero missing. Yeah. And good for you, Rain, for being willing to go with that. Because some game masters would have just been like, no, he gets away. Or, some games have mechanics in place to make that a little easier to swallow. I really like that in Mutants Masterminds, you can give a hero point to the group to allow a bad thing to happen. That's here is a bribe to let this bad thing happen just for now, please. And it helps, in my opinion. But if you can't do something like that, you have to find other ways to incentivize genre-specific behavior. And that's one of the things I like about things like bennies or hero points or other player currencies that they can earn for adhering to genre tropes. Whether that's great role-playing or, this is how a superhero story works. So if you allow this superhero thing to happen, I'll reward you for it. Yeah, and that also comes back to the trust thing, where if you tell your players, hey, I intend for this to happen, it's not going to ultimately result in your defeat as a group. There's a story reason that I want this to happen. I can't tell you much about it, but trust that I have your best interest in mind, and this will be an exciting plot development down the line if you allow this to happen. Because player characters operate by a different set of rules than the protagonists of a traditional story. I beg of you to do the trope so I can hand you a point. I beg of you, please. Ave due dembala. Dr. Voigt, welcome in. It's okay to be late. This is a good vibe stream. If you have any questions about keeping things fresh, please feel free to put them in the chat. We've got about 12 minutes left, so let me know. Dominic, I just remember the session I played where I wound up with like 4 or 5 hero points by the end and only had to spend 1 because my dice were on fire. Yeah, that can happen, and then it stops being quite as useful of a resource. But that's why I always tell people, spend your hero points when you get them. If you have a good game master, they will cycle them back to you. And don't just use them for rerolls. Use them for the fun things like editing the scene or using extra effort without having to suffer the penalty, or looking for GM inspiration, things like that. I've actually started having a physical pile of hero points at the table so that I can only give out so many. And then I tell the players, once I'm out of these, if you don't spend them, I don't have more to give you. So it helps encourage them to make it more of a cycle. Claude says, I've never really been able to pull off handing the heroes a defeat, but it's such a genre thing. It's tough. And it's nobody likes to lose. And if they can do anything to avoid losing, they will. That's why I like to say up front with people when they join in on one of my games, failure is not game over. And it's not intended to be an end state of the game. I will always do a fail forward. So if they do fail, it is not the end of our story. It is an opportunity to pivot our story. I've had games. I've had a game end in TPK that wasn't good. But the next session we did an adventure in the afterlife to make a deal to bring them back to the real world to do something, to continue the story going. Yeah, just come up with something crazy they can spend it on. Everyone pitch a hero point, and that NPC you like a lot will show up to help you. Yeah, that's good. It's good advice too. Nate says, one that is kind of bad, though, is a player that is a GM that when the GM that's supposed to be running it is not ready, and he relies on you to kind of run the game for them. Yeah, you have to be very confident in your abilities to improvise if you're not going to prepare much. Because even though they don't know the script, if you are not confident and you are not capable of adapting quickly, the players will know that you're wasting their time. It's not fair for game masters that a lot of the prep work falls on us. But if you're not going to do that work, you have to be able to provide a good experience even without the prep work. Because people are carving out part of their existence on this planet to be in your game. Whether that is, once a week for 10 years or just for 4 hours at a convention, people are coming to you and entrusting a portion of their entertainment with you. That's one thing I really take seriously about running convention games is I'm providing an experience for strangers on their vacation. It's something that doesn't resonate often for me, but it can occasionally be brought into stark relief. I think I mentioned this after Gen Con, but at Gen Con this year, Gen Con last year, I had a couple of people play in one of my games, and they had an amazing time. They had an excellent time. I wrote down their names in their emails so I could keep an eye out if they were going to sign up for my games this year. It was a dad and his teenage daughter, and they played in one of my Titan City games with the superhero kits. It was great. It was one of those sessions where everybody is just firing on all cylinders. The role-playing is going really well. In true Alex fashion, I ran out of time, and I said, okay, I can either yada yada this at the end to just tell you a little bit about how it's going to end, or we can keep playing for a little bit. And they said, you better not stop the game right now. We don't have anywhere to be for like 2 more hours. Let's all get in. And we played for another 45 minutes over the 4-hour time limit. And I had a great time. And I was disappointed when I didn't see that they'd signed up for any of my events. Well, the dad and his wife, they came up to me at the booth at Gen Con this year. And they said, we bought all the M&M stuff last year. Our daughter loved your game. She talked about it all year. It was like her favorite thing that happened at Gen Con. And we couldn't sign up for any of her games because she died in a car accident 2 weeks ago. And she was like 15 years old. And they sought me out and other people at the convention to let us know that they appreciated us sharing this moment with their daughter and bringing this sort of joy and entertainment into their lives. And you don't think about how important what we do is until something like that happens. They gave me a little glass rabbit that lives in my dice box now. It helps me roll poorly still, but I'll never forget the way that felt, what that brought into perspective for me. And that was right around the time that I started getting more energized about getting back into running our Freedomly Dark and the Multiverse of the MasterMage campaign. Something about that interaction reminded me that what we do as game masters is important. We're not saving the world, but we are coloring people's experiences, and we're providing an escape, and we're having fun. We're playing a game with people, and it's important. It's a big responsibility, and it's something that I hope all of you remember when you sit down to be a game master, is that people are trusting you to to tell a fun story, to have this amazing adventure, and to do things that they don't get to do in their regular lives. So please remember that. Yeah, sorry about that. Claude says, I'm going to need to discuss that with my players because I don't like it in the end. Yep. Dominic brings up a good point. Want to keep things fresh, run a game that's a totally different genre. That's basically how the first bits of the MCU were. Yeah. If you're just burned out on running a superhero game, try something else. Try a horror game, or try, I really enjoyed this Brindlewood Bay game I ran a couple weeks ago at UConn. It was I wrote it in the universe of Bones, the TV show. And it was just an adventure with the 5 interns off doing a case because everybody else was in quarantine. And it was a great time. It was a police procedural forensics game, and I'd never run anything like that before, but I would really like to see a game that is that, because I think it would be really fun, sort of like a Monster of the Week meets like NCIS or something like that. Yeah, Paul says it's one of the bad lessons the ampersand game teaches, that failure means death. Yeah, and that's one of the first things that you need to break in players if you're going to be introducing them to new games. You want them to know that there are different expectations. Things like never split the party or never fail are not true for a lot of other role-playing games, especially Mutants and Masterminds. If you're running M&M, splitting the party is perfectly fine. There will be instances where they need to split up. And when that happens, you need to have techniques for splitting the party as a game master to make sure that it's not stale, that there's no large amounts of downtime for lots of people. Doc Void, goal number 1 for me is to make sure my players are having a good time. Not all of them are as into superhero stories I am, but they seem to be getting it so far. That's awesome. Yeah, and please also remember to make sure you're having a good time too, Doc Void. It's important. Claude, I remember a player that hit me with I don't think this worked out as well as you hoped before disappearing from the voice chat. Oh, that sucks. I'm sorry to hear that. Oh. Paul, you never know how important the impact of your actions can be. It's kind of a wonderful, miraculous thing. Just the process of making people happy is a much bigger deal than we sometimes think it is. Yeah. Yeah, and we're making people happy. That's not nothing. Thank you for sharing that story, Alex. Great perspective. Don't apologize. Brindlewood Bay. Yeah, I'm probably gonna run some Brindlewood Bay on stream at some point because it's just a really good game. It's yeah, and I'll probably run native Brindlewood Bay because it's Murder She Wrote meets Eldritch Horror, which is it was a ton of fun. I really liked learning it. Sharpening split party skills is importante. Yeah, you definitely there's a skill set to it. There's probably an episode there for Joy of Game Master and how to split the party. I'm going to write that down for next week. Because it is its own skill set. You have to be able to keep everybody engaged and interested. Joy of Game Mastering. Split the party! With an exclamation point. Yeah. But people can get restless if you don't pay attention to them, and yeah, we'll talk about it next week. We've been watching a lot of Superman, original movie, and My Adventures cartoon. It really stressed to me that there needs to be some lows for the highs to really pop. Yeah, I really like the My Adventures with Superman cartoon too. I think there's a lot of cool things to take out of there for an M&M perspective, especially because ostensibly the party of player characters is Superman, Lois, and Jimmy. So one of them is like a PL-15 superhero, and the other ones are cub reporters. He's probably not PL-15 in that cartoon. He's probably closer to 12 or 13. But it's interesting having that sort of mixed party and finding ways for everybody to feel like they're contributing. I think that's something they do really well in that show. Is it's as much a Superman adventure as it is like a Clark, Jimmy, and Lois caper, which I think it's very well done. I really, really like it. I think Jack Quaid is excellent as Clark as well. And I love that they let Superman be hopeful and they let him have some anxiety about things that he would naturally have anxiety about. Yeah, he's not broody, but he is anxious about things, which I think that's a great place to put it. Yeah, I really need to give Brindlewood Bay a deeper look. I like it. Murder, She Wrote Me, Jojo Toro, that sounds amazing. Yeah, the party of characters is meant to be an elderly woman's book club who helps solve crimes. So you have things like, what's your cozy activity and what is your cozy space? And yeah, it's really good. Yeah, My Adventures with Superman is so good. I really like it. Yeah, maybe I'll write up something about how to do that, where one player is the superhero and the other players are and they're not even supporting characters. They're also main characters in their own right, the three of them. And maybe some of that comes with when there's a big combat scene, there are other heroes on hand that the other two players can play. Like when Monsieur Mala and the Brain show up, I imagine maybe Jimmy and Lois's players get to play those characters for combat scenes. Or when Livewire and Heatwave teamed up to help them break into Light's Core? It's been a little bit, I don't remember, but yeah, I think there's a lot to recommend about that show. Not just from a gameplay perspective, just from this is a great bit of Superman media. Yeah. If anything, Superman's a supporting character. It's My Adventures with Superman, not Superman's Adventures with Lois and Jimmy. Yeah, that's true. I think it's kind of Clark's adventures with Superman too, because he's just learning the Superman role. I actually played a game. I played a Mutants Masterminds game a few years back. That was a Daily Planet game where the characters were Jimmy, Lois, Cat Grant. Why can't I remember the sports guy name? Lombard. No? Steve Lombard, yeah. And Clark Kent were the 5-player characters. And I picked Clark Kent because I was a little worried. First, I love Clark Kent. He's my favorite superhero ever. So, any chance to play Superman is great for me. But I was worried in that situation that whoever got Clark was just doing it to be a jerk and to have all the superpowers while everybody else just got to stand in the background. And I made it my mission to be Superman as little as possible in that scenario. The GM, to his credit, did come up with a scenario where Superman was stripped of his powers. A red sun dome came down over Metropolis. So there was, he did think, is the Clark Kent player going to be a jerk about this? But I still got to do some fun Superman stuff. Like I got to call the Fortress of Solitude. I got to ask Kellex to send a Superman robot to come try to help the situation. Yeah, it was fun. It was a great time. Oh, holy cow, everybody. It's 6:04 already. My favorites have alternated between Spider-Man and Wolverine for years. I love Spider-Man. I love Wolverine. I just love superheroes in general. There's not very many that I don't like, but Superman will always be my favorite. Jimmy Olsen's one of my all-time favorite characters. That would have been such a fun game, really getting to play with the personality. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I keep coming back to doing one myself, but there's too many games to run and not enough time slots in the conventions I go to every year, which is I guess that's a me problem to have, but because I want to run another Guardians of the Galaxy game. I want to run more Suicide Squad. I want to run Justice League. I want to run the Avengers. I've got to run Titan City stuff because that's, I'm trying to help get the game out there. I want to run. I wrote an X-Men adventure that I think is excellent, and I'm trying to come up with a follow-up to that. Yeah, there's so many good stories to tell. I want to run another Mummy adventure. Yeah, so lots of good stuff. I wonder what Jimmy Olsen or Rick Jones would talk about. Playing as the bouncer in my Gotham City Misfits game was great. I love the Misfits so much. Oh, I run a game at conventions with just a bunch of Z-list supervillains. Some that I made up, some that are actually canon characters, like the Bouncer. The Bouncer appears in one Batman comic, and it ends with the Bouncer getting kicked in the sewer until he bounces to death by Batman, because the old comics are crazy. He gets coated in a chemical rubberizer that makes him bounce everywhere. Jimmy Olsen, Rick Jones, and Snapper Carr walk into a room. Oh my god. Summoned by Casey Jones for the weirdest Avengers of all time. Well, it is after 6 my time now. So we are going to have to wrap things up. Thank you guys for hanging out with me this evening. It's good to talk about this stuff. It's not as mechanical a topic as some of the other stuff we've covered is, but I think it's an important one because there's a lot of psychology and mental notes to take about game mastering, and we're all here to contribute to each other's mental health in regards to how to be a game master. Paul, this is meant to be every Tuesday. It should be every Tuesday. So we'll be back next week for tips on splitting the party. So if you have tips about that, please bring them in. If you have questions about that, please bring them with you next time. It's 5 p.m. EST, which is 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I don't know other times, but times are tough. We do not have ThursdAGE this week because American Thanksgiving is on Thursday, but we'll be back next Monday with Mutants Masterminds Monday. And I'll be back here again next week for the joy of game mastering. Otherwise, thank you guys for hanging out with me. 9 a.m. tomorrow here. Okay, wow. Yeah, it's my. I love talking. I love talking with you guys about this stuff. It's important. I say this at the end of all my sessions, but role-playing games can't happen without good game masters. And the only thing that takes the creation of a great game master is somebody volunteering to be game master. It's not as dangerous or mystifying as a role as some people will make you think it is. And I want to help build that bridge. So thank you guys for hanging out with me. I will see you next time. Until then, be good people. Take some time to play a game for yourself, and we'll see you then. Bye.